You scratch at your arm. A rash is forming. Could be from the damp fabric. Could be from the tea steam. Could be karma. There's an old legend that a wandering monk once cured his flea infestation by bathing in pickled plum brine and wrapping himself in lotus leaves. You would try it. But plum brine is a luxury. And lotus leaves are for temple offerings, not desperate interns of tea culture. You recall watching a merchant's wife pass by once, her robe swaying like poetry, scented with real camellia oil. She didn't look at you, probably couldn't see you behind the curtain of your own filth. Your hair tangled, oil slicked, matting at the base of your neck like a feral animal. There are barbers. Yes, but only for those who can afford to not look like a disappointment. A scholar once wrote that in the Song Dynasty, virtue could be read in one's garments. If that's true, your virtue is unraveling under pressure. Still, there's something darkly reassuring about wearing the same thing every day. No decisions, no expectations. Just the same damp apology draped over your increasingly itchy body. By mid-afternoon, your teeth begin to throb. Not because of candy you've never seen candy, but because last night's rice crust was one chew too many. It was supposed to be soft. It wasn't. And now your molar hums with the low, angry tone of a gong in mourning. There is no dentist. There is only Uncle Bao with pliers, vinegar, and a grip like fate. You run your tongue along your teeth. One is sharp, like it's trying to rebel by becoming a knife. Another feels loose, wiggling in its socket like a guilt-ridden official. And the back row, gone. Just Gap souvenirs from bad years, bad food, and one ill-advised walnut. You don't brush. No one does. Some chew willow twigs, or rinse with warm tea if they're feeling fancy. But mostly, you just hope today isn't the day a tooth declares independence. The breath, oh, the breath. Even the local stray cat turns away. You've developed the Song Dynasty equivalent of garlic knots on steroids, halitosis, brought to you by gum rot, rice fermentation, and zero dental plans. Historians still argue whether tooth decay was seen as shameful or simply inevitable. In official portraits, mouths are closed, perhaps to appear wise, perhaps to avoid immortalizing cavities. One legend says a Taoist alchemist once made a paste from powdered jade and crushed pearls that could reverse decay and whiten teeth. But even if that's true, and it's probably not, you don't have pearls. You have hope, and a rice husk stuck between your incisors. You pass a mirror shard in the kitchen. You look. You shouldn't. Your gums are red. Your lips cracked. Your smile resembles an abandoned pagoda, crumbled, forgotten, slightly cursed. You remember Old Man Joe, who lost all his teeth at 40 and now drinks everything through a bamboo straw. His nickname is Soup Whisperer. You try not to laugh. Laughter hurts. Let's talk treatments. Some herbalists suggest swishing with salted duck broth. Others recommend fire therapy, heating a copper rod and pressing it gently to the jaw to evict the tooth demon. This is not a joke. This is your healthcare plan. And if the pain becomes unbearable, extraction by candlelight with tools designed for woodworking. The bleeding is expected. The screaming is optional, but common. One particularly charming ritual involves biting down on a coin while praying to the spirit of teeth. Yes, it exists before the local healer yanks with the kind of force that's normally reserved for tree roots or stubborn curses. If you're lucky, the infection doesn't spread. If you're unlucky, it climbs up into your face, swells your cheek to melon proportions, and then you become a cautionary tale told by grandmothers over bitter melon soup. Even nobles aren't spared. The emperor might sip dew-soaked lotus petals and eat stewed peacock. But his teeth, same enamel, same bacteria, same slow betrayal. The irony? You live in a civilization renowned for its tea. Green tea, black tea, oolong. All things modern dentists claim might help reduce plaque. But you don't drink tea to save your teeth. You drink it because water might kill you faster. So here you are, young, half-toothed, half-starved, and smiling like a jack-o'-lantern made by a ghost with arthritis. And still, tomorrow, you'll eat rice crust again. The pain in your teeth fades, not because it's gone, but because your entire body is now aching in harmony. Your back sings a sorrowful ballad, your hands cramp like wilted lotus petals, and your legs twitch from hours of squatting. This, right now, is what passes for a break in your life as a Song Dynasty laborer. You don't go to work. You wake up inside it. The tea house doesn't clean itself. At dawn, before the sun can be bothered to rise, you're already chopping firewood with a blade that's more rust than metal, then hauling water in 2 uneven buckets that ensure you'll grow lopsided before 30. After that, sweeping rice husks from the front steps with a broom that once had bristles. And that's just your pre-breakfast cardio. You pound soybeans into paste for congee. You steam dumplings that split open out of spite. And you fan the embers under the stove while sweating like a rice farmer in a poetry contest. If you're lucky, someone brings you a burnt bun. If not, you pretend you're fasting for spiritual clarity. Then comes the main event. Customers. The tea house fills with men who work less and drink more. Merchants with silk robes, too clean to be trustworthy. Scholars who argue about Tang poetry while spilling vinegar sauce down their fronts. Couriers who leave trails of mud and insult. And everyone expects you to serve them with a smile, or at least without hurling a pot of tea at their heads. Your job description includes smiling at insults and bowing while invisible. When a dish breaks, it's your fault. When tea's too bitter, it's your mood. When someone's foot gets stepped on, even if it's yours, you apologize. Historians still argue whether song laborers were respected essential workers or mildly tolerated background noise. It's probably both. You're needed, but never noticed. Lunch you wish. You sip hot water steeped with boiled wheat. At husks, pretending it's soup. It isn't. You dream of noodles, not the chewy kind, the any kind. Someone says the nobles eat duck and broth spiced with cloves and anise. You mentally slap them. Your stomach protests. But your hands keep working. You mend broken chopsticks with twine. You wipe tables that haven't been truly clean since the previous dynasty. You shoe cats who somehow think they're in charge. They might be. And then, around mid-afternoon, a local bureaucrat strolls in. This is not good news. Bureaucrats don't pay. They leave scrolls of poetry instead of copper coins. You accept the scroll with a bow and a hollow laugh. It might be beautiful, but it won't buy you dumplings. The irony song. China boasts one of the most advanced economies of its time, paper money. Booming trade, inventions galore, but not for you. You earn your keep in broken fingernails and calloused feet. Oh, and about those feet, let's just say your straw sandals disintegrated 2 weeks ago. Now you wear scraps of cloth tied with hope and string. Splinters are just part of your soul now. You catch a glimpse of yourself, reflected in the tea kettle. Your hair is tied back with grease. Your eyes are dull. You're young, but you've aged like meat in the sun. Your fingers twitch involuntarily, too much scouring, not enough rest. Dinner shift begins with the same steps: boiling water, slicing roots, dodging rats. The same faces return, plus a few who drink to forget the the same things you suffer. By midnight, you wipe the last table, scrub your hands raw, and slouch near the door. The floor isn't warm, but at least it's horizontal. Tomorrow, the routine restarts with fewer teeth, less hope, and a poem you can't read but keep anyway. Somewhere in your sleep, the temperature changes sides like a petty warlord. One moment, you're barely warm under your single, rag-dyed blanket. Next, you're peeled off the mat by a heat wave that crawls into your mouth and sets up camp behind your eyes. You're not imagining it. The seasons here don't play fair. Summer in Song China is not a gentle stroll under cherry blossoms. It's a humid fist to the lungs. You wake up sticky, already sweating from dreams that had no breeze. The air is so thick, you could pour it over rice. Your clothes, yes, still the same cling to you like guilt. They haven't dried properly since the last thunderstorm, and now they smell like boiled laundry and regret. The tea house doesn't have a fan. Of course it doesn't. You have paper fans, the kind that break when you look at them sideways. So you wave your hands and pretend it helps. But it's not just heat, it's insects. Biting, buzzing, bold insects. Mosquitoes that evolved on a diet of scholar blood and peasant tears. Flies that land on your face mid-yawn. Fleas that hold nighttime dance parties under your waistband. No net, no spray, just you, your itch, and a smirk from the universe. Then winter arrives. The poetic term is crisp air. The scientific term is bone-eating cold. Your blanket, which barely pretended to help in July, now stiffens like dried seaweed. You curl into a ball smaller than your dignity. Your hands ache before they move. You breathe out fog, and the floor, once merely unpleasant, is now a glacier. Water freezes in the bucket. Tea turns into sad slush. You try to scrape a little warmth from the embers of yesterday's fire, but it's mostly ash. You warm your fingers on a hot bowl until it cools, which is immediately. You would think they'd close the tea house in this weather. They don't, because rich people still want hot drinks and poor people still need to work. You boil water until your fingers blister. Your joints click like bamboo in the wind. Your skin cracks, and your snot freezes before it escapes your nose. Historians still argue whether these harsh seasons were endured with stoicism or simply complained about nonstop. Judging by your current internal monologue, you'd bet on the second. There is no insulation. Houses are made of wood, rice paper, and optimism. Summer turns them into ovens, winter into ice boxes. There is no thermostat, no central heating, no warm socks, just extra suffering. And clothing, still the same two-piece wonder. In summer, it suffocates. In winter, it does nothing. You add extra layers, which are just other dirty garments sewn together. You look like a scarecrow built by someone with heat stroke. Bathing sounds like a solution, but hot water costs fuel. So you skip it. Again, your sweat becomes a protective glaze. Insects don't care. Neither does your skin, which now flakes like dried rice paper. Mid-shift, you step outside to dump dishwater and notice a noblewoman walking past in silks that rustle like soft gold. She's fanning herself. Her cheeks are powdered, her parasol embroidered. For a moment, she locks eyes with you. Then she looks away. You wish you could care, but you're too tired, too sunburned, too frostbitten. Weather, it turns out, is not a background condition, it's a daily opponent, an invisible bully, a constant reminder that you, in the grand scheme of things, are barely 1 degree away from disaster. But you've made it through another day, not comfortably, not elegantly, but upright, breathing, sweating or shivering, Take your pick. You press your palm to the window's wooden frame. Warm in summer, freezing in winter. Either way, it reminds you what century you're in and how much longer you have to survive until sunrise. The first time you drink the water, nothing happens. You feel victorious, invincible, hydrated. You laugh in the face of bacteria. The second time, you regret every decision that led you to this life in a Song Dynasty tea house. See, you don't have many choices. The river water flows past the shop in a romantic kind of way if you squint. But it also carries waste, fish guts, dead insects, dye runoff from the nearby workshop, and possibly 3 different curses. You can boil it. Sure, when you have firewood, which you don't. Not this week. And so, like every desperate peasant or underpaid tea boy before you, you take your chances. The good news, it tastes like water. The bad news, it tastes like this century's water. Earthy, algae-kissed. Sometimes with a delightful note of dead fish or someone's laundry detergent made from pine ash and wishful thinking. Clean water is not a right, it's a superstition. Bathing, as an idea, is even more controversial. You've been told it opens the body's pores, which sounds great until you realize those pores are now gateways for bad air and lurking illness demons. So, bathing is done rarely. Public bathhouses exist, but they're expensive, overcrowded, and the water's been used by so many strangers. It qualifies as a community soup. When you do manage to wash once every few weeks, it's ceremonial. You heat water. You strip behind a thin wooden screen. You scrub with rice husks or coarse linen. And afterward, you feel colder, exposed, like you've peeled off the one layer that stood between you and the plague. Most days, you settle for rubbing your face with damp cloth and hoping nobody notices the smell. They do, but they're also too tired to care. It's not like you stand out. Everyone stinks. Everyone's hair is crunchy. And no one's armpits have known joy since the Tang Dynasty. Then there's the matter of disease. Water is both salvation and saboteur. You need it to live. But it brings friends, like dysentery, cholera, hookworms, tiny microscopic party crashers that enter your body with a splash and leave behind days of regret. If you're lucky, you survive with a cautionary tale. If not, they send you off in a wooden box with nothing but rice cakes and a vaguely disappointed monk. Historians still argue whether the water supply in Song cities was moderately managed or a hydrological circus. Whatever the case, filtering wasn't invented yet, and most purification methods involved prayer or a sprinkle of ash. Because nothing screams sanitation like tossing dirt into water, you start carrying a cup everywhere, not because it's cleaner, but because drinking directly from the ladle is frowned upon by the more germ-paranoid crowd. Your boss tells you to refill the water barrel twice a day. He doesn't tell you that the upstream neighbor runs a tofu shop and dumps waste into the same source. You find out by taste. The worst part, you get used to it. Your stomach develops the resilience of a warlord's warhorse. Your tongue forgets what clean tastes like. You crave tea not for the flavor, but for the boiling, because at least that means it's probably not going to betray you. By night, you lie in bed and listen to the sound of rain tapping the roof. You wonder if it's safe to collect. You wonder if anyone would notice. You fall asleep imagining a world with indoor plumbing, filtered water, hot showers, and soap that doesn't smell like burned garlic. But here, water is a roulette wheel. Bathing is a risky business. And survival, it's mostly a question of which drop breaks the system. So next time you fill your plastic bottle from a modern faucet and complain it's not mineral rich, remember this moment. Remember the ladle, the river, the regret, and be thankful your water can't kill you. The tea house fades behind your closed eyelids. The heat, the cold, the buzzing of insects all retreat into the soft darkness. You're no longer thirsty. The noise of 1,000 footsteps on wooden planks becomes a distant hum, like waves folding into the shore. Let your breath slow. Let your muscles forget the weight of the wooden buckets, the sting of river water, the stone hard bread and the clatter of chipped bowls gone. You're safe now, far from the moldy straw mat and the flickering lanterns. Tonight, you don't need to boil anything. No need to haul water. You can rest, fully and deeply, with the knowledge that your next drink comes from a clean tap, not a cursed stream. Sleep gently. You've earned it. Hey guys, tonight we wake up not in your cozy bed with clean sheets and a functioning espresso machine nearby, but in the back alleys of Hangzhou during the Song Dynasty. The year is 1127. You've survived the night curled up on a damp reed mat, sharing space with 6 other workers and one surprisingly territorial chicken. The smell of tea wafts through the shutters. Yes, but so does mold, rat droppings, and something that might be pickled cabbage or someone's forgotten sock. You stretch, and every joint sounds like ancient bamboo in a typhoon. You probably won't survive this. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, so are fleas. Morning breath, and your looming 16-hour tea house shift with no pay and no shoes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and your local time in the comments. Let's see who else is trying to sleep through misery tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You roll over, sort of, and the straw digs into your back like medieval acupuncture, except less therapeutic and more tetanusy. Your head's pounding from last night's tea dust soup, a term for boiling whatever leaves fell under the customers' tables and pretending it's dinner. You stretch out your legs, bump someone else's elbow, and apologize out of reflex. You don't know who you just kicked. It might have been a foot. It might have been a gourd. Either way, no one reacts. Everyone's already halfway upright, bent over with age even though no one's past 30. Your housing situation is what scholars might generously call communal. A single-room shack built from warped bamboo and whispers, with a roof that leaks just enough to keep the floor permanently moist. You've got one shared clay bowl, 0 privacy, and the emotional support of your one luxury item, a 3-legged stool that doubles as your pillow. You've slept in your only outfit, a hemp tunic, stiff with salt from last week's sweat, and a pair of pants that haven't seen water since the last flood. One sock remains on your foot. The other is missing, likely stolen by the chicken. You don't blame her. She has ambitions. You rise, spine crunching, and duck under the doorway that was clearly built for shorter people or sadder ones. The morning air is thick with incense, charcoal smoke, and the ever-present promise of a back-breaking shift. And tea. Always tea. It's everywhere. It perfumes the breeze and clogs your nose, clinging like a ritual or a punishment. You can't decide which. You step into the street and promptly twist your ankle on a cobblestone. Welcome to the Song Dynasty. No streetlights, no orthotics, just ambition and uneven ground. Around you, Others shuffle to their day jobs with the same expression, equal parts caffeine, withdrawal, and existential dread. Somewhere down the road, a tea house bell rings. That's your workplace. That's your battlefield. You're not a soldier, but you are about to wage war against exhaustion, splinters, scalding kettles, and noblemen who believe you should thank them for allowing you to serve them poorly brewed tea. You walk barefoot across sticky tiles, past the night soil man sloshing buckets of urban fertilizer, and the fishmonger, who definitely doesn't refrigerate anything. You've learned to breathe through your mouth, but even that has risks, like accidentally tasting the air. A mistake you only make once. You reach the tea house. A bamboo sign creaks overhead, shaped like a teapot. Very charming. It's called Fragrant Pavilion, which is poetic for please ignore the rats. Inside. Yesterday's scent of jasmine and roasted barley still lingers, but now it's mixed with sweat and shame. The tea house manager glares at you. You're late by Song Dynasty standards, which means precisely on time, but still wrong. He's wearing what you assume is a silk robe, or at least something that pretends it isn't burlap. His eyebrows are shaved into judgmental arches. You bow. He nods. You survive the greeting. Your job. That comes later. For now. You mop floors with a rag that smells like regret and light mildew. Your breakfast is postponed until further notice. Or possibly forever. Oh. And your stomach? It's begun growling in classical Chinese. You're hungry, but first you'll need to earn the right to chew. You begin the day not with food, not with calm, but with a bucket, a leaky one. Your task clean the floor that no one in 900 years will ever refer to as sanitary. The tea house's planks are warped, splintered, and generously seasoned with old tea spills, dropped buns, and whatever leaked from last night's rat. You crouch, knee-deep in mystery stains, scrubbing with a rag that probably used to be someone's underrobe. It's hard to tell anymore. Texture-wise, it's halfway between seaweed and disappointment. You are not alone in this task. Your fellow workers, 4 teens, 2 elders, and one mysterious figure who never speaks, move like haunted shadows through the steam rising from kettles. Everyone is barefoot. Everyone smells faintly of ashes and bitter roots. No one complains. That's a luxury. Complaining means someone might hear you and assign another task, like emptying the tea slop trough or soothing the drunk nobleman who insists the oolong insulted his ancestry. Eventually, the kitchen door creaks open. Time for your morning meal. You get what's known as tea house gruel, a watery rice broth flavored with the faint memory of mung beans and despair. It comes in a cracked bowl and is spooned out with an implement so blunt it could double as a safety device. You sip. It's warm. You chew something. It might be a bean. It might be a pebble. The line is thin. Historians still argue whether the average Song Dynasty laborer consumed enough calories to survive the week based on your breakfast. The answer leans toward maybe, but only with generous air, occasionally. If you're lucky or if a customer leaves leftovers, you get a real bite, a sliver of steamed bun, a pickled radish corner, or once, just once, half a salted plum. That plum is now legend among your coworkers. You will probably never taste fruit again. The tea begins to flow, and with it, your real work. As a lower-tier worker, your job is to serve the servants, fetch hot kettles, scrub the sides of clay pots, refill bamboo charcoal. You are not allowed near the customers unless you are silent and invisible. If you so much as breathe too loud near the governor's wife, your pay will be docked. Joke's on them, there was no pay to begin with. The air in the tea house is sticky, not humid sticky, a syrup of steam, human breath, and vaporized jasmine oil clings to your skin, turning your tunic into a mobile sauna. The more expensive teas like Dragon Well or Monkey Picked, which were probably just regular leaves named after an unlucky monkey, are poured upstairs for the elite. You're lucky if someone trusts you to carry warm water. The kitchen head, a wiry woman with the eyes of someone who's seen too many broken cups and not enough rest, hurls instructions. More firewood, boil faster. No, not that ladle. The ladle. Everything is urgent. Everything is flammable. At one point, you almost fall into the fish sauce barrel. That's not a metaphor. The lid was off. And your balance is, what's the word bad? There is no lunch break. There are no breaks. If you lean for too long, someone hands you another rag, another kettle, or just kicks your foot with the affectionate aggression of a tired sibling. You've washed your hands 14 times, not out of hygiene, but because it's the only time you get warm water. And even then, it's mostly for the dishes. By mid-morning, your fingers are wrinkled like overcooked noodles. Your knees ache from crouching. Your soul aches from knowing this is your life. But hey, at least no one's thrown a teacup at your head yet. You've learned to be grateful for small things. Oh, and that tea you keep serving, you're not actually allowed to drink it, not the good stuff. Anyway, only discarded leaves, oversteeped scraps, and rinse water. You once tasted the leftover dregs of an emperor-grade pu'er. It was transcendent. You cried. Then someone caught you and made you clean the privy floor with your sleeve. Welcome to Upward Immobility, Song Dynasty Edition. By now, your knees are bargaining with your spine and losing. You stretch if you can call that trembling. Sway, stretching, and remember nature calls. Unfortunately, nature doesn't leave a voicemail. You wobble outside the tea house, past the kitchen smoke and scolding, until you reach the alley behind the building where dignity goes to die. There are no proper toilets. Not here, not anywhere, really. Just a series of bucket latrines, glorified wooden tubs with holes carved into them, like someone tried to invent a toilet using only anxiety and guesswork. You wait your turn behind an elderly man, 3 apprentices, and 1 feral cat who seems to have staked its claim on the leftmost bucket. When your turn comes, you hesitate, and rightfully so. You perch over the plank seat. It wobbles. There is no privacy. The wall is a curtain. The curtain is burlap. The wind lifts it with every gust, offering a free view to the neighbors who pretend not to look, but absolutely do. One makes eye contact. You both silently agree to forget this moment forever. You breathe through your mouth and try not to think about how many previous guests have used this very seat today, or yesterday, or last week. There is no running water, no flush, no dignity, only the faint smell of fermented everything, and a growing awareness that the plague probably started exactly here. Some historians still argue whether these communal latrines contributed to public disease outbreaks or were merely innocent accomplices. But really, does it matter? You're here now, and you wish you weren't. You reach for what passes as toilet paper stiff hemp paper, if you're lucky. If not, it's bark, straw, or a communal rag that has achieved sentience and wants to be left alone. You choose the bark. It's the least alive. Afterward, you do the only thing available for hygiene, a rinse from a shared bowl of gray water. The water is slightly warmer than death and smells like 10 years of disappointment. You feel cleaner, technically, but spiritually wounded. Back inside the tea house, No one talks about what happens behind the curtain, but you all know. The shuffle back inside is slow, solemn, a little quieter than before, a little more broken. It's worth mentioning that noble families fared slightly better. If you were rich, you might have an indoor chamber pot made of porcelain, if you were truly elite. But you still had to dump it out. Or, more accurately, someone like you would dump it out while trying not to breathe. And the streets, let's just say they were rivers of consequence. It was common to hear the warning cry, Guandao, a version of Gardilu, just before someone upstairs dumped the contents of their chamber pot onto the street below. You learn to listen fast and dodge faster, of course. This entire situation assumes you have working intestines, but food poisoning is a rite of passage. So is dysentery. So is constipation from eating nothing but starch and shame. You don't control your bowels, they control you. You don't plan, your bathroom breaks, the street layout does. And bathing, that's for emperors and corpses. Maybe. Once a month, you get access to the public bathhouse. But only if you've saved enough coins, which you haven't. And only if the line isn't 4 hours long, which it is. Besides, many people believe that bathing too often opens the pores and invites sickness, which is just the body's polite way of saying, no, thank you. I prefer to ferment. So here you are, back at work, slightly dirtier than before, with a new appreciation for modern plumbing and the kind of bathroom that locks. You daydream about soap, toilet seats, and solitude. But dreams are luxury. You've got dishes to scrub and a feral cat to avoid. It's now sitting in your bucket. You're starving. That faint bowl of rice water from earlier, it evaporated the moment you bent down to clean the teapot rack. Your stomach groans loud enough to rival the kitchen's boiling kettles. You don't get lunch in the Song Dynasty. You get an opportunity to not faint. Maybe in a lull between orders. You slip into the back room, where staff meals are stored in a wooden chest the size of a coffin and twice as ominous. You lift the lid and find today's delight pottage. It's always pottage. A gray-brown slurry that seems to have lost all hope in seasoning somewhere around 1123. It consists of boiled root vegetables, ancient barley, and the occasional surprise chunk, sometimes a turnip, sometimes something with eyes. You ladle it into a wooden bowl. The rim is splintered, the spoon is warped, the aroma is patient. It waits for your resignation. You chew. If texture were emotion, this would be regret. But at least it's warm, occasionally. A lucky worker snags a leftover meat bun. You are not that worker. You do not know that worker. That worker may not even exist. Meat is rare, expensive, and sacred. Even pork. The staple of Song cuisine is too precious for common workers unless it's been cooked once, dried twice, and whispered through a soup. Spices, also mythical. There's salt, but it tastes like it died years ago. To drink. There is tea, sort of. More accurately, tea-colored water steeped from the 6th or 7th reuse of leaves that once touched actual flavor. Still, it's better than the alternative river water. Historians still argue whether the Song Dynasty tea obsession improved overall public health or just masked the flavor of deadly bacteria. Either way, you sip your sad, leaf-flavored broth and pretend you're part of the ceremony. Meanwhile, nobles dine upstairs. You hear the clink of porcelain, the delicate slurp of oolong brewed at precisely the right temperature. You imagine duck glazed in plum sauce, pickled mustard greens, rice cakes sprinkled with sesame. They feast. You chew barky pottage and try not to chew too loud. You recall yesterday's kitchen crisis, the weevil loaf. Someone found a small loaf of millet bread so dense and riddled with bugs that it could double as a weapon. Extra protein, said the chef. You ate it. You still see it in your dreams. Bread is especially cruel. It's either so hard it threatens your teeth, or so moist it threatens your bowels. There is no in between. Sometimes, to stretch it further, they mix in sawdust or ground tree bark, which explains why yesterday's crumbs tasted like despair and pine. You glance around and catch a glimpse of the old man who prepares the dried fish strips. He's chewing one now, with the jaw strength of a crocodile. You tried one last week. It took 45 minutes to break it down, and it tasted like a sandal dipped in seawater. You didn't regret it. Hunger is persuasive. There's one cook, a middle-aged woman with exactly 2 teeth, who swears by a magic broth she makes by boiling leftover onion skins, eggshells, and fish heads. You had it once. It was weirdly energizing, probably because it gave you a parasite with motivation. As evening shadows creep in, your stomach settles into its usual hum of surrender. You've made it through another day without fainting. Congratulations. Your reward is a nighttime bowl of more pottage. But today's has a little green speck floating on top. Could be a leaf, could be mold. Either way, it's the most excitement your palate will experience all week. You shuffle toward your cubbyhole of belongings, not because your shift is over, but because the tea master said, "Take 5. You take that 5 like it's a vacation to paradise, except paradise, in this case, is a single crusty tunic, a pair of increasingly theoretical socks, and something that might have been shoes in a past life. Welcome to Song Dynasty fashion, where comfort is a rumor and cleanliness is an accident. Your clothing situation is consistent. One outfit, always. It's a roughly stitched tunic made from unbleached hemp, which means it scratches like guilt and smells like steamed cabbage. It never fully dries, because the humidity in Hangzhou is relentless, and washing is something you do once a month if you're lucky and it rains. There is no soap. Not really. You might scrape some leftover tea ash into a paste and rub it on your armpits, but that's less hygiene and more desperate performance art. Historians still argue whether the Song Dynasty actually had access to herbal soaps for the lower classes, or whether they just pretended dirt was good for your immune system. Your sleeves are frayed from constant wiping of sweat, spills, and occasionally your own tears. The hems drag in the mud. You try to roll them up, but the string you used to tie them snapped 3 days ago, and you've been faking it with a bamboo skewer. Your underclothes are an unspeakable topic, but let's speak them anyway. They don't exist. The elite wear silk robes that whisper as they move. Your clothes scream. Every motion brings a new itch. And just when you think you've adjusted, a new patch of fabric decides to rebel. The seam down your back, slowly opening up. The inner thighs, threadbare. The collar, a choking suggestion of dignity. Let's talk shoes. Or the simulation of them. You wear sandals constructed from rope and optimism. They provide zero protection, but ample opportunities for pebbles to teach your feet lessons. In rainy season, they disintegrate. In dry season, they blister. Either way, your toes are visible, cracked, and perpetually cold. Now, the parasites. Your skin crawls, and not metaphorically. Lice live in your tunic seams like they're paying rent. Fleas jump from coworker to coworker like gossip. And bedbugs, let's just say. You never feel truly alone. Now, We lower ourselves into a cold stone chamber, the kind where morning sunlight doesn't so much shine as apologize. A clay pot wheezes over an open fire, bubbling a concoction of herbs, milk, and, disturbingly, someone's carefully collected pee. You sit upright on your straw mattress, if you can call straw and lice a mattress, and inhale deeply. Congratulations. You've just woken up in a medieval medical household. The good news, you're alive. The bad news, breakfast is medicinal. Again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, because someone out there is probably snacking while listening to this. And I have regrets for both of us. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The healer hands you a cup. Inside lukewarm goat's milk, stale beer, a few withered thyme sprigs, and a suspicious yellow tint. This is not food. It's a diagnostic smoothie. In medieval Europe, physicians relied heavily on the doctrine of humors, the idea that health came from a perfect balance of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. You're expected to sip your own bodily essence to help rebalance whatever's out of tune. You'd think they'd use herbs. Nope. They used you. Urine wasn't just a waste product. It was a legitimate diagnostic tool and a ready-made medicine. People believed it could tell fortunes, cure coughs, and soften your skin. And, in a twisted sort of medieval multitasking, it often did all three. The healer examines your pee like a sommelier, swirling it in a glass vial, sniffing, squinting, nodding solemnly. You're apparently too cold in spirit. Drink warm, they whisper, handing the cup back. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians truly believed in the internal magic of urine, or if it was just the most readily available ingredient that didn't cost anything. After all, it's always in stock, and it doesn't require importing from distant lands or blessing by priests. Just harvest it and hope for the best. You'd think the rich would be spared this. Actually, no. Nobles paid top coin for aged urine, collected from healthy virgins and kept in dark jars for months to improve its potency. This was added to healing broths, eye drops, and yes, skin ointments. You don't want to ask what toner meant in 1347. One quirky tidbit, pee was also believed to tame evil spirits. Sprinkle a ring of it around your bed, and you'd be safe from nighttime demons. Unless, of course, the demon was the smell. You trudge through your day with a faint sour scent clinging to your skin. You're told that's the healing working. Your stomach begs to differ. The healer assures you this is a holy cleansing. Your intestines file for divorce. And now, with the smell of warm goat milk and last night's desperation still wafting in the air, you make your way to the next cure. Because this was just the morning brew. Next on the medieval medicinal tasting menu, roasted viper with a drizzle of vinegar. You stand in the dim kitchen, watching a local apothecook, a profession halfway between chef and necromancer, uncoil a dead snake, like it's a particularly long sausage link. Apparently, snake flesh is excellent for balancing phlegm, whatever that means. The irony, of course, is that it's often served cold. The logic goes something like this. If you have too much moisture in your body, say, from a cough, you need something dry and warm to fight it. Snake, being dry and warm in nature, is perfect. Science, no. Vibe-based medicine, absolutely. One mainstream historical fact, medieval apothecaries genuinely did list snake meat in official pharmacopoeias. It was dried, powdered, boiled, and served in broths or baked into pies. Imagine biting into your crusty dinner and crunching down on something suspiciously fang-shaped. Snake was believed to treat everything from gout to unbalanced wombs. Because of course it was. You're handed a wooden spoonful. It smells like old chicken and regret. The meat is stringy, the vinegar is sharp, and the texture is somewhere between jerky and regret. As you chew, the apothecook leans in and says cheerfully, "You'll feel the venom working its way out." Wait, was it supposed to be venomous when cooked? Historians still argue whether medieval healers understood venom at all, or whether they just thought snake eggs power. After all, why else would you dry and grind up the most dangerous parts, fangs, skin, gallbladders, and store them in leather pouches labeled for cleansing? There's a fine line between bravery and culinary madness, and medieval Europe danced on it in heavy boots. One fringe tidbit. Some snake wines were made by fermenting vipers in large jars of cheap ale. The resulting drink was believed to give strength, prolong life, and make childbirth easier. That's right. Pregnant women were sometimes encouraged to sip alcoholic snake juice. You almost admire the confidence. You trudge back to your palate, stomach slightly unsettled and mouth tingling in the wrong places. You're reassured this means the medicine is working. You're not reassured at all. Of course, there were alternatives. If you were lucky and very rich, you might get peacock brain soup, dried hedgehog bile, or a syrup made from crushed emeralds. But for the average sick peasant, it's whatever's crawling nearby, covered in vinegar, and still slightly twitching. Now that you've had your protein and poison quota for the day, it's time for a light digestive walk to the leech tent, because this is only course 2. And your body, dear listener, is still full of humors that clearly need correcting. You've barely finished digesting your artisanal viper stew when a cheery monk in robes the color of moldy parchment beckons you into what might optimistically be called a treatment room. It smells like wet socks, fermented honey, and something that once was an animal. You're about to try the medieval equivalent of kombucha, a medicinal brew made from fermented urine. Yes, urine, but not just any urine. It had to be fresh, preferably from a child, ideally from a red-haired virgin, because obviously their pee was pure, scientifically unprovable, morally questionable, but thoroughly believed. You sit cross-legged, holding a ceramic cup filled with something suspiciously warm, and wonder how this became normal. Here's your mainstream fact. In the Middle Ages, urine wasn't just waste. It was a diagnostic tool, a cleansing agent, and, to your horror, an ingredient. Physicians would examine its color, smell, and even taste. Yes, taste to determine what ailed you. Too pale, your humors are out of balance. Too dark, the devil might be involved. Somehow. Everything ended with the advice, drink more urine. Quirky tidbit. Urine was also used in toothache potions and to clean wounds, because nothing says sterile like communal pee. Monks boiled it with herbs, cooled it in clay jars, and stored it on shelves beside dried lizard tails and powdered mummy. And you thought your local pharmacy was weird? You sip. It's sour. It's warm. It's well. Let's not dwell on the flavor. You're assured this potion cures everything from coughing fits to melancholy. Whether it actually did is, you guessed it, up for debate. Historians still argue whether the real benefit came from the herbs, the ritual, or the sheer placebo-powered will to not die of embarrassment. You swallow another mouthful and contemplate your life choices. Outside, a woman is rubbing stale bread with garlic and dipping it into a dish of lard and urine for her arthritis. Another man, entirely bald, is washing his scalp with fermented goat pee to regrow hair. His head shines like a well-oiled melon. Hope springs eternal. You'd laugh, but you're trying not to throw up in a dusty corner. Two monks argue over whether horse urine has more healing power than donkey urine. They cite Galen. They cite Avicenna. They do not cite common sense. One of them pulls out a tiny scroll with an illustration of the four humors dancing around a bladder. It is both horrifying and oddly festive. Modern vocabulary time you are basically living in a giant slow-motion science experiment with zero oversight and deeply questionable ethics. Clinical trials. Nope. Just trial and very frequent error. Oh. And remember our old friend irony? In a world with no access to antibiotics, urine might have actually helped its ammonia could sterilize wounds better than filthy water. But again, context matters. Because when you're sipping someone else's bodily fluids, hoping to fix your medieval sniffles, maybe you're not sick. Maybe civilization is, you toss the empty cup aside and wipe your lips with the sleeve of your flea-ridden tunic. Congratulations. You've completed your first full course of internal cleansing. And now, if you're lucky, you might graduate to something truly thrilling, like goose fat enemas or moldy bread plasters. But first, perhaps a light snack, because nothing pairs with regret quite like pickled beetles and existential dread. You stagger out of the monk's infirmary, a little dizzy from fermented things that should never be fermented, and shuffle toward the communal dining hall. Which is a strong word. It's more of a drafty shed with splintery benches, a leaking roof, and a smell somewhere between overcooked cabbage and undercooked plague rat. On the table sits your next medicinal delight pottage. Not to be confused with soup, stew, or anything you might voluntarily consume. Pottage is what happens when you boil vegetables until they forget who they are. It's a thick sludge of turnips, wild onions, and whatever didn't rot in the cellar. Oh, and today's bonus ingredient, dried snake meat. For energy. Supposedly, you poke it with a spoon that feels like it has tetanus. A thick bubble rises and bursts, releasing a smell so aggressive it could be used in chemical warfare. You eat anyway, because you're a good patient, and because it's either this or chewing on your own shoes, which may or may not contain fewer toxins. Mainstream fact pottage was the daily staple of medieval meals, especially among the poor. It could be endlessly recycled. Today's dinner was yesterday's lunch, was last week's failed potion experiment. Ingredients depended on season and desperation. In winter, roots and dried herbs. In summer, slightly less dead things. Bread, when available, was dense, dark, and doubled as a weapon or emergency building material. Now for your fringe tidbit, some physicians recommended boiling vipers in wine and grinding them into a paste with cloves and pepper. This fine delicacy, called theriac, was thought to be a panacea effective against plague, melancholy, and even snake bites ironic. Since it's made from snakes, kings hoarded it, peasants prayed for it. You get the off-brand version, made with yesterday's lizard tail. As you chew through a twig that might once have been carrot, a monk walks past with a bucket of something yellow and steaming. For the constipation tea, he explains cheerfully. You don't ask. You do not want to know. Scholars still argue whether these meals provided any nutritional value, or merely gave people something warm to chew while their bodies tried to survive dysentery. Some insist the constant stewing of ingredients made them easier to digest. Others think it just concentrated the mold. Either way, You're not getting up from this bench without help. The man across from you bites into a crust of bread so hard it echoes. He winces. A tooth flies out. He shrugs and dips it in the pottage for later. You reach for your drink, hoping it's wine. It's not. It's something called small ale, barely fermented. Low alcohol beer brewed because water is considered a suicide pact. This batch tastes like regret and barley left in a sock drawer. But it won't kill you. At least, not as quickly as the river water, which is currently flowing with everything from fish guts to enthusiastic leeches. Outside, a woman is feeding her child a spoonful of honey mixed with crushed ants. For digestion. Or maybe because they've run out of licorice root. In any case, the kid seems happy, which is suspicious. You mop your chin with a piece of cloth that doubles as your napkin, pillowcase, and bandage. Then brace yourself for the next delicacy. Because rumor has it, the apothecary is experimenting with a new jelly made from crushed frogs and owl bile. Bon appetit. You wake up the next morning, your stomach doing cartwheels and your breath able to strip paint off walls. Today's special is not on a plate, it's on your body. The medieval wardrobe. And trust me, it's less fashion statement, more fabric-based punishment. You slip into the same tunic you wore yesterday, and the day before, and probably the week before that, because you only own one. Everyone does. Laundry, adorable idea, but there's no detergent, no washing machine, and certainly no laundromat, just a nearby stream, which is also the village trash can, urinal, and accidental soup base. So, no, your wool shirt hasn't touched water in months except for rain, sweat, and tears. Mostly tears. Mainstream fact, most medieval folk wore undyed, coarse wool or linen clothing. It was handmade, ill-fitting, and designed for function over comfort. Men wore tunics, hose, and occasionally a cloak. Women got long gowns with belts and aprons. If you were lucky, you had underclothes, but most weren't lucky. Your tunic is stiff. Not from starch, there's none. It's stiff from sheer willpower, and from absorbing everything your body has produced since last summer. You scratch your shoulder, something scratches back. Lice, constant companions, not just on your head. Oh no. They're in your seams, in your armpits, in your dreams. Medieval sleep is a group activity, and not in the fun way. And your shoes? If you have them, congratulations. They're little more than stitched leather pancakes with all the structural support of wet toast. Holes, yes. Soles, barely. Socks, hilarious. Your feet are wet from dew, damp from sweat. And soon, probably bleeding. But you walk anyway, because it's that, or lie in the mud and get stepped on. Now, for the fringe tidbit, some people believed that lice helped balance your body's humors. That's right, parasites weren't just tolerated, they were sometimes welcomed. If you were too clean, too healthy, something must be wrong. Better to keep a thriving ecosystem on your skin than risk imbalance. So basically, your itching might be considered a medical achievement. Scholars still argue whether people truly embraced their filth, or if it was just necessity masquerading as tradition. Some accounts suggest aristocrats bathed occasionally, using scented oils to mask odor. Others say even kings proudly avoided washing. Believing it weakened the body's natural defenses. One bishop apparently died from not changing his undergarments for years. Commitment, if nothing else. You lift your arm to adjust your hood. A smell escapes. It's yours. And yet, it feels personal, like an insult from a past life. Someone walks past and grimaces. You feel proud. You're winning at the medieval cologne game. As you trudge outside, your neighbor waves. Her dress is patched with strips of old goat hide. Her hat, a repurposed flour sack. You nod respectfully. She's practically royalty. You scratch again. A flea jumps off. It lands, thinks better of it, and comes right back. Loyalty. Remember that pottage with dried snake. That same snake might now be curled inside your hood for warmth. Because winter is coming, and you've got one layer to your name. You pull your cloak tight and pray it doesn't rain. But of course, it rains. Your mouth feels like the bottom of a medieval well damp, dark, and deeply untrustworthy. You try to stretch your jaw, but it groans like a haunted door. Welcome to dental hygiene, your 1325 edition. Spoiler, there is none. You run your tongue along your teeth. It's like navigating a cave wall, jagged, crumbly, and definitely harboring some prehistoric bacteria. There's no toothbrush, no toothpaste, and certainly no fresh mint strips. If you're feeling fancy, you might chew on a twig. If you're really going wild, you rub ashes or salt across your teeth like you're seasoning your own misery. Mainstream fact: medieval oral care was nearly non-existent. People relied on herbal rinses, vinegar, or chew sticks made of aromatic twigs like neem or licorice. There was zero concept of plaque or decay prevention, and yet somehow people managed, mostly because they lost their teeth before the decay got too fancy. Your gums are swollen. Your breath could knock out a monk at 50 paces. And that molar, it's loose. Every bite of hard bread feels like gambling with pain. But you eat anyway, because soft food doesn't exist. And your daily calories come from chewing like a medieval goat on punishment. Here's a delightfully disturbing fringe tidbit. Medieval physicians believed bad teeth came from an imbalance of humors or a buildup of corrupt phlegm. Solutions included bloodletting, gargling wine, or brace yourself drinking a potion made of roasted mouse. Yes, mouse. Because when your molars ache, what better cure than pure rodent essence? And if things got worse, you'd head to the village barber. Not for a trim. Oh no, for a tooth extraction. No anesthesia, no hygiene, no hope. Just a man with a rusted iron tool, a sturdy chair, and a strong grip. If you were lucky, he got the whole tooth out. If not, you left with a shattered root and an appreciation for medieval suffering. Historians still argue whether dental decay was as rampant in the Middle Ages as we assume. Some skeletal remains show surprisingly decent teeth, possibly thanks to low sugar diets. Others display horrors abscesses, worn enamel, and misaligned jaws from constant gnawing. It's also debated whether medieval people feared tooth loss as much as we do today, or simply accepted it as the oral version of retirement. You rinse your mouth with water from a cracked clay jug. The water smells vaguely like cabbage and hope. It does nothing. Your breath still carries the weight of last week's onion broth and regret. You consider chewing on mint, but realize you traded that for a piece of firewood yesterday. Survival requires sacrifice. And what about cavities? You have a few. You try not to think about them. The throbbing behind your eye is probably fine. Just a reminder you're alive. For now, as you shuffle off toward the field, you pass a man groaning in a doorway. His face is swollen, his cheek bulging like it's storing a squirrel. You nod. Solidarity. He raises a hand and mutters something about hot iron and blessed relief. You keep walking. Because medieval dentistry isn't a service, it's a warning. You grip the wooden hoe with fingers cracked and caked in dried mud. It's barely dawn, but the sun already looms like a slow-cooked punishment. You're not awake. You're simply vertical. And there is no weekend, no coffee, and certainly no paid leave. There is only work. Endless, gloriously soul-numbing work. This is your job now. Bend, scrape, lift, sweat, repeat. The field is your office, and the boss, nature. She is cruel, unpredictable, and doesn't give performance bonuses. If the crop fails, you starve. If you don't show up, you starve. If you die well, you won't be hungry anymore. Mainstream fact: the peasant class in the Middle Ages was subjected to brutal physical labor from a very young age. Sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week, often with the seventh reserved for more work, disguised as religious obligation. The idea of free time was reserved for nobles, cats, and figments of your imagination. Let's not forget women. Forget resting lady in a tower. You're nursing a baby, threshing wheat, hauling water, and maybe delivering another baby all before noon. And the men, if they weren't farming, they were conscripted, building roads, sharpening tools, or serving in some noble's personal Game of Thrones episode. There's no escape route. There's only your daily quota of back pain. Quirky tidbit: children start working around the age of 5, not helping out, working, herding animals, picking weeds, scaring off crows with pots and a lot of yelling. Childhood is less playtime and more apprenticeship and daily suffering. Your toys, a stick. Your game don't fall into the well. Fun: you swap tools with your neighbor, whose hand is permanently shaped like a sickle. He chuckles, showing you a scar he claims came from a particularly aggressive cabbage. You laugh because it hurts less than crying. Your back makes a sound no back should make. It's fine. It's probably just medieval scoliosis setting in. You wipe sweat from your brow with a scrap of linen that was once white. It's now a general brownish hue of despair. You can't remember when you last bathed, but neither can anyone else. So it's fine. The flies don't even bother you anymore. They're your co-workers. Historians still argue whether medieval labor was unrelentingly awful or occasionally broken up by feasts, festivals, and pagan holidays that let peasants breathe between beatings. Some records hint at rest days and harvest celebrations, but for most, these were fewer than TikTok videos without dancing. You hear a bell, no, not a break, but a call to help rebuild the neighbor's fence. A cow wandered through again, and you can guess whose job it is to chase it. Yours. Everything is your job. Welcome to medieval freelancing, where every task is unpaid and involves splinters. You dream of retirement, but retirement is death. Possibly from exhaustion. Possibly from tetanus. No 401(k). Just a shallow grave behind the pig shed, and even that's not guaranteed. Still, as the sun dips slightly and you squint toward the village, you allow yourself a fantasy lying down. Not sleeping, just lying down. A horizontal miracle. And maybe, just maybe, someone else will have to chase the cow tomorrow. You think the worst part of medieval life is the labor until the weather shows up with a cackling hold my mead. There's no thermostat, no insulation, no warning, just you, some questionable wool, and a hut that leaks like a politician under pressure. Winter is not a season, it's a siege. You wake up, and your breath forms a small fog cloud above your face, which is impressive. Considering you're indoors, you didn't sleep so much as shiver unconscious. Your blanket, a damp wool cloak shared with 2 cousins, a chicken, and a prayer. The floor is dirt, your walls are thin, and your roof is a helpful suggestion rather than a solid structure. Outside, the wind howls like a disgruntled god. Inside, it howls too, through gaps in the door, the ceiling, and somewhere that used to be a window. You huddle near the fire, which is mostly smoke and sadness, and try not to inhale too many soot particles. The chimney optional, the coughing constant. Mainstream fact, medieval homes, especially among the peasant class, had no real heating beyond a central fire pit. Stone or wooden walls did little to keep the cold out, and sleeping huddled together with family and animals was the only defense against frostbite. Now, flip the calendar to summer, and you're still miserable. This time, it's a medieval oven. Your walls trap heat like an ambitious sauna. Your clothes soak through in minutes, and your entire home smells like wet goat and overcooked turnip stew. You try to sleep, but your straw bed is basically a compost pile, and every mosquito in a 12-mile radius has RSVP'd to your ankles. Flies buzz, fleas hop. You scratch, you weep, and just when you think it can't get worse, a thunderstorm rips your thatched roof clean off like it's peeling a medieval burrito. Clothing isn't helping. That wool tunic that scratched you in the winter now becomes your personal, portable sauna. You can't take it off, though, because one, it's the only thing you own, and two, the sun would burn your skin to parchment. Your shoes, if you're lucky enough to have them, are falling apart. One foot is dry, the other's in a puddle. Classic. You try to wash off the sweat in the river, but the river is angry, swollen, and filled with things that want to give you a rash. Historians still argue whether climate-related suffering was more intense in Northern Europe or equatorial regions. But everyone agrees on one thing: no one was comfortable. Ever. And those rare days when the weather is actually nice, that's when the real horror begins. Agricultural panic. The fields are too dry, or too wet, or too buggy. The bees are late. The barley is early. Something is always wrong, and it's always somehow your fault. Quirky tidbit in Scandinavia. Some communities used carved wooden amulets to negotiate with the weather gods. They would place them outside during storms, hoping the gods would be so impressed with their whittling skills they'd cancel the blizzard. Spoiler, they didn't. You finish your day drenched in either sweat or sleet. Depending on the month, you strip down to your undershift soggy, beige, and emotionally broken, and collapse into the same straw pile you've cursed every night for the past 15 years. And just as you start to drift off, thunder cracks outside, and you feel one, single, icy drop hit your forehead. You wake up thirsty. Not just a little parched. Your mouth is sandpaper. Your tongue feels like it's coated in fur. And your brain is gently reminding you that water is supposed to be a basic human need. But in medieval life, water is not your friend. It's a game of microbial roulette. And every sip is a gamble between hydration and immediate regret. You trudge to the nearest water source. It's a stream, or it used to be. Now it's more of a suspiciously green trickle that doubles as a latrine for passing goats and a dump site for the blacksmith's waste. The color says lime cordial, but the smell says botulism smoothie. You fill your bucket anyway, because you have no choice. Spoiler alert, the bucket leaks. Mainstream fact in most medieval settlements. Water came from rivers, communal wells, or rain barrels, none of which were protected from contamination. Sanitation, as a concept, had not yet RSVP'd to the Middle Ages. You bring it home and try to boil it, but that takes firewood, time, and a pot that doesn't have holes. So instead, you just say a little prayer, drink half a mug, and wait to see what happens. Usually cramps, sometimes worse. You wonder how people bathed, and the answer is rarely. Because medieval science believed bathing opened the pores and let disease fly in like a guest at an uninvited dinner party. So instead, you just scrub a little. Maybe, if it's a holiday. When people did bathe, it was a team sport. Communal bathhouses were a thing for the wealthy. For you, maybe once a year. If the river's behaving and the fleas are in a good mood, soap, as we know it, didn't exist. Instead, people used lye and angry mixture made from ashes and urine. Yes, urine. We've come full circle. Open debate. Historians still argue whether people truly believed bathing was dangerous or if it was simply impractical due to climate, cost, and convenience. The result is the same either way. People were very, very smelly, and it shows. You try to wash your face, but your washcloth is just a scrap of linen that's been repurposed 17 times. The soap smells like regret, and the water is so cold it makes your soul briefly leave your body. You dream of a bath, a real bath. Warm, clean, private. But in your reality, a bath is a terrifying puddle, a community event, or a bucket challenge you didn't sign up for. And afterward, you're still wearing the same itchy wool tunic from last week, now damp and even itchier. Welcome to medieval skincare. Your pores are confused. Your dignity left months ago. Quirky tidbit. Some folks believe that rubbing goose fat on your skin would protect you from disease and cold weather. You, of course, have no goose, just chicken grease, which is not quite the same. By nightfall, you're exhausted from simply staying alive. You lie down, dry mouth, dirty feet, water bucket still dripping in the corner. Maybe tomorrow the river will be cleaner. Or maybe you'll sprout a new intestinal parasite. Either way, you're too tired to care. The night deepens. Outside, the air is quiet, save for the occasional rustle of straw or distant drip of water echoing from a crooked roof tile. You shift slightly beneath your threadbare blanket, the day's grime still clinging gently to your skin. But somehow, you don't mind anymore. You've survived worse, and you'll survive tomorrow, too. The stories of ancient hardship are heavy, yes, but they're also strange, beautiful, and in their own way, a reminder of how far we've come, or how soft we've gotten. No shared boots, no bucket baths, no soup made of turnips and shoe leather, just a quiet room, a warm bed, and a soft hum in your ears. So breathe in, letting the flicker of torchlight in your imagination fade. The hard straw beneath you becomes a mattress. The air turns gentle. The fleas fall asleep. You made it through a medieval day without time travel insurance. Close your eyes. Drift back from the year 1325. You're safe. You're warm. And you don't smell like goose fat. Good night, traveler of strange timelines. Now, we drift backward past neon lights, past typewriters, past Roman aqueducts, and well into an era where marriages were less about romance and more about respectable arrangements sealed by contracts, cows, or coin. You find yourself waking up as a young woman in a world where the words "till death do us part" are less a poetic promise and more a social death sentence. In both the Byzantine Empire and pre-Islamic Arabia, marriage wasn't exactly your fairy tale affair unless your fairy tale includes dowries, legal jargon, and the occasional public scandal. You would never think that your family's goat count could decide your romantic fate. But here we are, in the Byzantine Empire. Families negotiated marriages like tactical alliances. Brides were assets, and weddings were negotiations that involved bishops, lawyers, and very little input from you over in pre-Islamic Arabia. The situation wasn't wildly better. Though it could be weirder, marriages could be tribal contracts, clan peace deals, or even poetic gestures if you belong to a Bedouin tribe with a flair for drama. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and the time you're listening. I like to know who's sleepless in Sydney or dozing off in Detroit. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your husband is usually older, possibly grumpy, occasionally a clergyman's cousin, and almost always chosen without your enthusiastic consent. You're handed off like a carefully counted batch of wool because your family must provide a dowry. And they definitely counted the bed sheets. If you're lucky, he smells like myrrh. If not, well, vinegar and apathy in Byzantium. The marriage contract wasn't just a formality. It was practically a prenup designed by a bishop. These documents listed property, rights, and occasionally penalties for bad behavior. If you left your husband without a very good reason, like say, he turned into a literal hermit, your dowry might be lost to the ether, or worse, claimed by his second cousin. Meanwhile, in pre-Islamic Arabia, marriages varied wildly between tribes. Some allowed women a surprising degree of choice, others not so much. In certain clans, a woman could end her marriage simply by returning to her father's tent and reciting a specific poem. Sounds romantic. But if you didn't have a father or a tent, good luck with that. Still, scholars argue whether these poetic divorces were widespread practices or exceptions reserved for women with serious tribal clout. The average woman might be stuck navigating social codes stricter than Byzantine tax law. And yes, both were confusing and occasionally involved goats. For a woman in either society, marriage was rarely the beginning of a partnership. It was more like stepping into a decades-long improv skit with very strict costume rules and no option to leave early unless your husband committed something egregious, like becoming a monk or dying, preferably the latter. Even love wasn't a requirement. If affection happened to bloom, usually after surviving your third winter together without accidental poisoning, then congratulations. You've unlocked the Byzantine bonus level, tolerable companionship. Historians still argue whether such couples were rare flukes or hidden gems within rigid societal norms. And yet, beneath the rituals, contracts, and poetic vows lay an invisible pressure. Don't fail. Don't be barren. Don't cause gossip. Don't return home unless you want to live in a pantry. But it's only Section 1. And technically, you're still married. The divorce is coming later, and trust me, it's not going to be subtle. Waking up divorced in the Byzantine Empire is a lot like waking up unemployed, socially radioactive, and slightly cursed but with more incense. You roll over on your straw-stuffed mattress, if you're lucky enough to still have one, and realize your marital status now comes with all of the fanfare of a plague announcement. People don't whisper. They exhale entire gospels about you over figs. The church, ever the subtle influencer, makes it clear divorce is frowned upon, not banned. Byzantium wasn't that progressive, but definitely dressed up in theological guilt and legal complexity. Technically, Divorce is permitted under certain conditions: adultery, impotence, monastic escape, or, in some miraculous cases, incompatibility of temperament, which sounds polite until you realize it requires church trials and multiple testimonies from your nosiest relatives. Once divorced, you don't exactly get a fresh start. No, you get social purgatory. You're now classified as damaged but retrievable, sort of like a cracked amphora someone still uses because the handles work. Your dowry, if the divorce was your fault. Say, for breathing too assertively, it might be gone. If it was his fault. Good luck getting it back unless your family is connected enough to scare a bishop. In smaller towns, you don't need to announce the divorce. It travels faster than carrier pigeons. You become that woman, the one who couldn't keep her man. As if husbands are squirrels and you forgot to feed him acorns. Your options narrow like a collapsing tunnel. Return to your family awkward. Enter a convent, drafty. Or remarry, assuming someone finds ex-wife of Demetrios the fish merchant, an alluring title. Meanwhile, the church insists you wait. Officially, there's a period of reflection. Unofficially, it's a grace period. In case your husband rises from the dead or repents with a goat and a psalm. You can't just remarry the next day. That would imply you're eager. And eager women are suspect, in theory. Women had some legal standing. Byzantine law allowed women to own property, initiate divorce in extreme cases, and argue in court. But practice is, of course, another matter. Judges were typically men, the lawyers were clergy, and the courtroom smelled like damp shame. One fringe document suggests that a few upper-class women used their connections to quietly relocate to distant estates and reinvent themselves as widows. Because socially, widows were less scandalous than divorcees. Historians still argue whether these reinventions were common tactics or rare acts of social rebellion by clever women with family gold and excellent handwriting. For middle class or poor women, the future post-divorce is more predictable in visibility. You fade into the fabric of the city like a crack in a marble step. Useful if someone needs your weaving or herbal medicine. Otherwise, you become a footnote in your own family tree. And yet, the Byzantines loved complexity. Some communities quietly accepted divorced women back into the fold, particularly if they brought children or an inheritance. After all, nothing heals public scandal like public money. The bishop might frown, but if your brother donates a new icon for the church, forgiveness becomes curiously fast-tracked. You sip weak wine, scan the street for judgmental neighbors, and wonder if next time, if there is a next time, you might marry someone who doesn't confuse religious fasting with marital neglect. That is, if society ever lets you try again. You step out into the courtyard, and the air doesn't just judge you. It sighs in disapproval. Being a divorced woman in the Byzantine Empire means you've been demoted in the unspoken hierarchy of respectability. Not quite a criminal, not quite a nun, but somewhere between a scandalous story and a cautionary proverb. Let's talk about public perception, because perception is everything when your social life depends on how many bakers still nod at you. The neighbors, they won't say anything to your face. Instead, they switch from "good morning, Maria" to "oh, you're still here," which, in Byzantine, passive-aggressive, is practically a slap. You wear the same garments you wore last month, but somehow now they look provocative. Even the muted blues and unflattering brown tones scream I've been touched and returned. The markets aren't much better. A man you've known since childhood suddenly forgets how to weigh onions. Another insist your coin smells like temptation. Upper-class divorcees fare slightly better, but only slightly. They get to attend events with other women who fan themselves aggressively and discuss embroidery like it's code 4. Have you heard a noble-born woman might still host tea and lentil cakes, but the guest list shortens with each whisper. She used to be the wife of a magistrate. Now, she's just the woman who couldn't endure his melancholy humors. But here's where the irony kicks in. Men, especially high-ranking men, could divorce their wives on grounds so flimsy they might as well be parchment. Cold soup heresy, speaking too loudly in church heresy, looking mildly disappointed during a hymn, definitely heresy. And after such offenses, he walks away with his reputation intact and possibly remarries the next day to someone younger with superior dowry-to-waste ratio. Women not so lucky. A divorced woman who remarries too soon risks being labeled an adulteress retroactively. Yes, the math doesn't math, but Byzantine gossip doesn't care for logic. There are records, sketchy ones, but records nonetheless of women publicly shamed by clergy sermons disguised as general moral instruction. Everyone knows who it's about. The priest stares directly at you while describing the sin of abandoning sacred vows for earthly pleasure and goat cheese. Historians still argue whether this societal pressure was equally enforced in rural areas. Some suggest that outside Constantinople, people were too busy avoiding famine or tax collectors to care much about your broken marriage. Others claim that tight-knit villages were even more punishing because everyone knows everyone. And someone's cousin definitely saw you leave the bathhouse alone. Yet, not all is despair and judgment. In some Byzantine communities, widows and divorcees ran small businesses, usually weaving, dyeing, or herb selling. They weren't rich, but they were autonomous. A woman who knew how to prepare wormwood for stomach ailments could earn just enough respect to avoid becoming a sermon topic. In certain monasteries, divorced women found quiet refuge, copying manuscripts or growing bitter herbs, both of which felt emotionally appropriate. And then there's Theodora, not the empress, but the shopkeeper 3 doors down in your neighborhood. Her husband left her for a younger woman and promptly died of gout. She sells spices now and refuses to marry again. People whisper, but they also buy her cinnamon and keep coming back for her wit. She's proof that divorced women don't vanish, they adapt. So you hold your head just slightly higher. Maybe today, you'll walk the long way to avoid the fishmonger's judgmental squint. Maybe you'll visit the nuns who taught you to read years ago. Or maybe, just maybe, you'll start selling tinctures of your own. After all, you know firsthand the pain of rejection, and that makes for powerful medicine. You're no stranger to economics now. After all, being a divorced woman in Byzantium or pre-Islamic Arabia often meant becoming your own treasurer, market analyst, an inventory clerk, except you don't get a salary, and your credit score is the local gossip. If you're lucky, you still have your dowry in Byzantine law. A dowry technically belonged to the woman, even in divorce, but technically is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Reclaiming it often meant legal petitions, bribes, and pleading your case before a judge who hasn't smiled since Justinian. And if your former husband is influential or petty, you might get back half a ceramic jug and a sarcastic thank you note. So, instead of waiting for the imperial court to sneeze in your favor, you take action. In cities like Constantinople, some women turn to spinning and weaving. You sit on a low stool, surrounded by tufts of wool that smell faintly of wet goat, twisting the fibers into something sellable. It's not glamorous, but there's power in creation, even if it's wool socks for feet that haven't bathed since Lent. You sell them discreetly at the market, Or maybe you run a modest shop, hidden behind baskets of lavender and cumin. One historical account describes a woman selling homemade perfume crafted from pressed herbs and a possibly illegal amount of frankincense. Customers say it smells divine. The bishop says it smells like moral decay. Both may be right. In pre-Islamic Arabia, things play out a little differently. Women in tribal society had more autonomy than one might expect, especially among merchant classes. Khadijah, for example, was a wealthy widow who ran a caravan business and later married a young man named Muhammad. Not every divorcee could reach that level of influence, but the framework was there. Trade routes were open, and where there's camel traffic, there's economic opportunity. You might sell spices, dates, or textiles embroidered with symbols no one dares question. Some women controlled significant wealth, often through inheritance or savvy deals made before marriage. But others lived on the edge, bartering household tools or goatskins for basic supplies. Historians still argue whether divorce increased or decreased a woman's financial freedom in tribal societies. Some claim it removed male interference. Others note that it also stripped protection. And yes, there's always the option of remarrying well. But you've been through one round already. The idea of tying your economic survival to another man's whims sounds less appealing than fermenting onions with your bare hands. You do. However, attend the widow's market, a semi-organized trading zone where single, divorced, and widowed women could exchange goods. It's chaotic, a little cutthroat, and somehow therapeutic. One woman sells almond oil while reciting poetry. Another haggles over dates as if her life depends on it, which, to be fair, it kind of does. The line between respectability and survival is thinner than parchment here. One week, you're praised for being resourceful and modest. The next, you're accused of undercutting the price of saffron, and therefore society itself. Still, the economy doesn't judge it, just demands. So you sow, you barter, you hustle. Eventually, you learn how to stretch a coin until it squeals. You find that some men respect your tenacity, even if they'd never admit it aloud. One merchant offers you a partnership in soap making. Another sells you his donkey cart for half price after you beat him in a logic debate involving olives and morality. So, no, you're not a noblewoman wrapped in silk, sipping honeyed wine. But you are a divorced woman with a stall that makes just enough dinars to keep your children clothed and your dignity intact. And in a world designed to forget you, that's its own kind of wealth. You still feel the whispers, not in the ears, but in the eyes. Every time you pass through a crowded square or sit too long at a public fountain. There it is, the unblinking gaze of a society that's not quite sure what to do with a woman who's no longer anyone's wife. Divorce doesn't just end a marriage, it rearranges your social coordinates. You're not quite a maiden, no longer a wife, and far from being a revered elder, you've become a conversational speed bump in Byzantine salons. Your name might be preceded by poor thing or followed by, but you know how she is. And heaven help you if you were the one who initiated the divorce. In rare cases, Byzantine women could file for separation, especially for cruelty, infidelity, or if their husband happened to become a monk without warning. But even then, people would treat you like you just personally insulted the Virgin Mary. The church, for all its gilded icons and incense, wasn't exactly your hype squad. You attend liturgy with your head covered, not because it's required, but because anonymity now feels like armor. You keep your interactions polite, short, and vague. That's how you survive neighborhood tea circles, that ask invasive questions under the guise of sympathy. You've learned to smile through a bless your heart and nod solemnly when someone says they're praying for your clarity. Meanwhile, in pre-Islamic Arabia, social treatment of divorced women varies depending on the tribe. Some tribes were surprisingly progressive. Women could remarry, manage their affairs, and even recite poetry about their ex-husbands, and if the verses were good enough. Nobody dared argue. But in more conservative circles, you were expected to keep your eyes lowered and your mouth closed, permanently. One fringe account describes a woman who was so popular as a divorced poetess that 3 men tried to marry her simultaneously. She politely declined all 3, then published a poem about the joys of solitude. It went semi-viral by ancient standards, which meant 6 camels and a lot of murmurs. Still, being single again means walking a tightrope. You must not be too available, lest you're called indecent. But don't be too aloof either, or people assume you're bitter. Wear color and you're frivolous. Wear black and you're morbid. It's like living in a paradoxical soap opera, where the lead character is always judged, and the script was written by your neighbors. You also notice fewer invitations. At first, you think it's an accident. Then you realize weddings are delicate events, and your presence is seen as a bad omen. A living reminder that not all happily ever afters stay that way. Even your female friends shift uncomfortably. Some whisper about evil eye protections, just in case your heartbreak is contagious. Historians still argue whether these social boundaries were deeply cultural or more circumstantial. Some point to legal records showing divorced women winning cases, owning land, and even gaining social esteem. Others say those were anomalies, women with wealth, family ties, or poetic talent sharp enough to slice reputations. But for most, respectability is a balancing act performed in silence. You become excellent at taking up less space. You laugh without showing teeth. You answer questions without revealing anything. And sometimes when the wind carries just right, you hear a child repeating your name in the alley with no idea of the stories attached. Yet, there's an odd freedom to your invisibility. It lets you move through spaces unnoticed, collect rumors, observe human behavior like a low-budget philosopher. One day, you hear a group of women discussing marriage roles, and for once, you don't feel like you're missing out. You feel like you've dodged something. And that's the thing about judgment. It's loud at first, but eventually, it runs out of creative insults. What's left is a steady rhythm of your own making. You light your oil lamp, sip something vaguely medicinal, and smirk at the absurdity of it all, because being judged gets boring. But surviving, now that's a plot twist worth savoring. By now, you've learned to navigate society's side-eye with the grace of a Byzantine fresco, cracked but still clinging to dignity. But here comes the next challenge, money. You know, that stuff that no one talks about at feasts, but everyone obsesses over the moment the bread runs out. As a divorced woman in Byzantium, your financial prospects are complicated. If you are lucky enough to have a prenuptial arrangement, or if your dowry had clauses sharper than a double-edged sword, you might keep a slice of what was once yours. The law, in theory, lets you retrieve your dowry. In practice, you had to argue with your ex-husband's family, the church, and that one cousin who suddenly claims you were never truly married. Byzantine bureaucracy, after all, was invented by people who thought paperwork should last longer than the marriage itself. If you had children, the game changed. Custody typically went to the father, unless he was a monk, dead, or inexplicably turned into a hermit. This left you emotionally gutted and, more importantly, financially restricted. Widows had more economic flexibility than divorcees. At least a widow's property wasn't still alive and trying to reclaim it. So, What do? You adapt. Maybe you open a textile stall, embroider ecclesiastical robes, or offer discreet medical herbs to women who simply don't want another baby right now. These micro-enterprises are survival disguised as service. One fringe tale tells of a divorced woman who ran a bathhouse so clean. Monks whispered it might be sinful to enjoy it that much in pre-Islamic Arabia. Financial autonomy depended heavily on tribal customs. Some women could keep dowries, own land, and even lend money. Others, let's just say you were lucky if you kept your goat and your dignity. Bride prices mar in these societies were often paid directly to the woman, not her father. If you were clever, you could tuck it away like a financial escape pod. But if you were born into a conservative tribe, that money came with strings longer than a desert caravan. Still, there are legendary accounts of entrepreneurial women. One tale involves a woman who, after divorce, started trading perfumes and textiles across caravan roads. She allegedly sold her goods with slogans like, "Smell better than your ex's new wife," though historians are still debating whether that tagline is apocryphal. Speaking of historians, they still argue whether these economic freedoms were widespread or reserved for elite, well-connected women. There's a papyrus ledger that lists women's names beside financial transactions. But was that the norm, or an exception scribbled by a scribe with a progressive flair? Either way, divorced women had to think like accountants and act like diplomats. You learned to price your labor just below insult and just above survival. You bartered favors, stitched intricate patterns into belts, and became a human ledger of quiet resilience. And let's not forget taxes. Yes, even in the ancient world, taxes were a hobby governments pursued with religious fervor. Some Byzantine towns taxed market stalls so heavily that women would disguise their business as religious charity just to avoid another visit from the imperial collectors. Clever, yes. Legal, debatable, effective. You're still standing, aren't you? In tribal Arabia, some divorced women became storytellers or songkeepers, paid not in coin, but in shelter, food, or a new husband with slightly better manners. It wasn't glamorous, but it beat starvation. Plus, telling tales of love gone wrong in front of a fire was basically the original podcast. And through it all, you notice something strange. Independence doesn't make you rich, but it makes you sharper. You develop the kind of instincts that let you count coins by sound and detect lies by the angle of someone's smile. You become a walking, breathing, audit quiet, careful, and impossible to fool twice. No one ever builds statues for women like you. But you do build something better, a life no one expected you to survive, let alone own. You learn quickly that your social survival depends on visibility, strategically controlled visibility. You can't just walk through the Byzantine Forum or a tribal Arabian souk like you own the place. Even if you technically do own something, because the eyes that follow you aren't admiring, they're calculating. In Byzantine society, being a divorced woman meant you lived in a curious fog of recognition. People know you, but not how they used to. You used to be wife of so-and-so, maybe even noble lady such and such. Now you're the one who left, or worse, the one who got left. They don't say it. They whisper it in footnotes between bread purchases and at liturgies where nobody's actually praying. You pass the same stall 3 days in a row, and suddenly you're gossip with legs. A passing priest offers a subtle sermon about the sanctity of patience. A baker asks if you're fasting every day. A local widow, with perfect posture and terrifying cheekbones, offers to take you in, which sounds generous until you realize it means endless chores and a seat at the far corner of her table. And yet, You don't disappear, you adapt. You don't get loud, you get strategic. Byzantine women had options. Some built reputations as spiritual advisors, midwives, or lace makers so skilled that bishops allegedly offered indulgences just to wear their collars. You might even attach yourself to a local saint cult, not because you're devout, but because they have protection and regular incense. And if you're really bold, you copy manuscripts by candlelight for literate clergy who can't spell to save their lives. That's how you hear secrets about bishops, about lords, about your ex's new wife who allegedly snores like a donkey. In pre-Islamic Arabia, public space was equally coded. Tribal life didn't favor idle women wandering about. So you learn to operate from within a tent, but your voice travels. You make alliances through other women sisters, aunts, co-wives, turned friends. You trade incense for information and poems for status. Did you know some tribes believed divorced women had heightened Baraka spiritual energy? One tribe even invited a divorced woman to bless newborn camels. That sounds adorable, until you realize it's just a polite way to say, "Stand over there and don't curse us." And here's the paradox. Divorce gave you a strange kind of prestige. You're not property anymore, but you're also not a peer. People approach you with a mix of suspicion and fascination, like you're a walking, talking omen of what happens when a woman chooses not to be chosen. Historians still argue whether these divorced women had genuine power or just symbolic authority used to calm volatile male egos. One theory claims they served as informal mediators during disputes because they were neutral. Another suggests it was just a way to keep them busy. Meanwhile, your old in-laws host feasts where your name is never mentioned, but your cooking still is. You find this mildly insulting and also weirdly satisfying. And let's not forget fashion in Byzantium. You subtly adjust your veil to suggest that you're pious, but not a nun, modest, but not invisible. In Arabia, you let your jewelry speak anklets that chime at precisely the right moments, bracelets that gleam just enough to distract from the conversation you're not interested in having. And yes, there's the occasional man who calls you experienced like it's a compliment, but says it in the tone people reserve for well-traveled carpets. But you endure. You even thrive, not by shouting, not by demanding, but by becoming socially elusive. Hard to pin down, like a rumor that doesn't go away. You learn that reputation is just another currency, and you've already paid full price. Eventually, someone asks you, "Do you ever think about remarrying?" And you smile politely, as if you've never thought about anything else. But really, you've thought about everything else but that. In Byzantine society, remarriage wasn't just a personal decision. It was a logistical operation with the charm of a tax audit. Technically, yes, you could remarry, legally, even, but socially, it came with more conditions than a 21st century dating app's terms of service. If you were wealthy, your property suddenly attracted suitors like ants to spiced honey. They didn't want you so much as your olive groves and that conveniently located villa near the aqueduct. Love is blind, but land ownership has 20/20 vision. The church added to the drama. The Eastern Orthodox clergy wasn't thrilled with second marriages by the third. They were performing the ceremony with all the enthusiasm of a forced group project. A special penitential wedding liturgy existed just for those daring to remarry, which historians still argue whether it was meant to absolve guilt or just make everyone feel appropriately awkward. Either way, it featured fewer hymns and more judgmental eye contact. Pre-Islamic Arabia was, oddly, both more straightforward and more complex. Divorce wasn't stigmatized nearly as much. and remarriage could be swift, sometimes immediate. Tribal laws varied wildly. Some tribes insisted on a waiting period, known as ida, to ensure the woman wasn't pregnant with the former husband's child. Others treated the whole thing like a community reset button. Oh, that didn't work out. Let's try Cousin Jamal this time. And yes, Cousin Jamal always thinks he's the better option. But remarriage wasn't just about convenience. It was also about politics. In tribal Arabia, marrying a divorced woman wasn't necessarily shameful. It could signal your magnanimity, your ability to rescue someone from loneliness, or, more cynically, to absorb her former family's alliances. Because love is temporary, but camels and tribal alliances are forever. Of course, the woman had her own calculations. You've already survived one husband. Why roll the dice again? A new husband might be charming, or he might think bathing is a Roman conspiracy and poetry is for weak men. You weigh these options against the freedom of managing your own household, your own decisions, your own peace and quiet. And sometimes, bizarrely, your ex wants you back. The Byzantine ex-husband sends a monk with a letter full of regret and Latin grammar. The Arabian ex-husband just rides up on a horse and says, "So, want to try again?" It's the ancient version of a 2 a.m. text message. There were fringe cases too. Byzantine women who joined convents not out of piety, but as social protection. Safe from remarriage, but also from expectations. They prayed, they embroidered, they occasionally brewed beer. The monastic life was, for some, a loophole. Be single and respected, as long as you didn't mind fasting 200 days a year. Meanwhile, other women played the long game. They married older men with weak hearts and stronger wills, outlived them, and emerged into a widowhood of modest wealth and maximal autonomy. It wasn't glamorous, but compared to marriage number 2, it was freedom with a pension. So when they ask if you're thinking about remarrying, you nod. Maybe. But inside, you're already planning your herb garden, your quiet reading spot, your perfectly timed walk through the market just as the gossip dies down. You're not waiting to be chosen. You're choosing not to wait. And honestly, that's more radical than anyone wants to admit. Now, you rest your back against a stone wall, dry and sunbaked. As the weight of the day finally softens into evening, you've weathered bureaucracy, humiliation, and theological contradictions. But now we get to the bittersweet punchline: what happened after the ink dried on a divorce decree. The good news: you weren't automatically sentenced to a life of total obscurity. The bad news: you were now a walking social paradox, single, female, and therefore dangerous. In the Byzantine Empire, if you had even a small dowry left, or relatives who could tolerate your presence, you might live out your post-marriage years in a relative's household, or better yet, move to a convent, where nobody asks about your ex, your uterus, or your cooking skills. It sounds peaceful, until you realize that monastic life meant waking up before sunrise and spending the rest of your existence embroidering curtains for people who still had husbands. Still, better than being forcibly remarried to your cousin, which did happen more often than you'd like. In pre-Islamic Arabia, divorced women had, surprisingly, a little more wiggle room. Some tribes allowed them to keep property, remarry as they pleased, or even initiate marriage proposals of their own. Historians still argue whether this flexibility was due to genuine respect or simply a desire to maintain strategic alliances via female mobility. Either way, you walk the dusty road with a small pouch of dates and something unheard of in most of the ancient world, the faint aroma of freedom. But don't celebrate too fast. Your autonomy is conditional. One false step, like insulting a tribal elder or publicly refusing a marriage offer, and you're back to square one, this time as the punchline in someone else's cautionary tale. Still, the record shows that some women in both regions defied the script, entirely owning businesses, funding public works, or becoming mystics whose words outlasted those of their husbands. You wonder what it felt like to be remembered for something other than who you married or divorced. And here's the weirdest fringe tidbit. In a few rural villages in Arabia, women hosted divorce poetry slams. Yes, you heard that correctly. Poetic duels where ex-wives would roast their former husbands in verse, with other women cheering them on like an ancient open mic night with camels in the background. Historians still argue whether these events were ritualized empowerment or just stress relief disguised as tradition. Either way, it proves that sarcasm may be one of humanity's most enduring survival skills. Now, you stretch your limbs, sore but somehow proud. You've outlived your marriage, endured gossip and judgment, and carved out a sliver of space for yourself in a world that prefers its women quiet and compliant. But not you. You. Dear listener, get the last word